Good afternoon. Can I ask you to find your seats, please? Good afternoon and welcome to the Leo Baeck Institute here at the Center for Jewish History. My name is Markus Krah. I'm the Executive Director of the Leo Baeck Institute, and I'm very happy and grateful to welcome so many of you, family, friends, and students of Lore Segal. We, the Leo Baeck Institute, are honored and grateful that we can host this event in remembrance of her, because much of what Lore did in her life and much of her biography is so closely intertwined with what we have been doing. For those of you who are not yet familiar with the Leo Baeck Institute, I can spare you reading the fine print on the back of the brochure. We are a research archive and a library which for 70 years, we were founded in 1955, for 70 years have been charged with the mission to preserve and promote the history and culture of German-speaking Jews. And we do this in many different ways, first and foremost by collecting documents, archival documents and artifacts, objects and works of art, and by making them accessible. We have by now about 5 million pages of archival documents digitized, available to everybody who has an internet connection and is interested in this. We do it by supporting scholarship, and we do public programs, a wide range of programs from the podcast Exile, of which you may have heard, to book clubs, lectures, and a number of other programs. And importantly, in this panoply of things we do programs reaching a wider audience with and for people like Lore Segal, even though I've come to understand, and I think this is the point of the event this afternoon, there was no one like Lore Segal. So I'm very glad that we all agree on this, that we've all come here together to celebrate this. Welcome again, I'm glad, and let us celebrate a life well lived. Thank you.
Dear Beatrice, Jacob, Jean, David, Ben, Isaiah, and Lena, thank you for letting me speak here today. My name is Karin Hunter, and I initiated and curated an exhibition on Lore's life and work at the Bezirksmuseum Josefstadt in Vienna, which ran from February 2024 to January 2025. Given Lore's renown as a writer, the museum welcomed over 7,000 visitors during this time period. As news of Lore's death was extensively covered in Austrian newspapers, on national television and the radio, the number of exhibition visitors from October to January increased by leaps and bounds, and the exhibition had the highest number of digital hits among all of Vienna's 23 local history museums. What I'm here to talk about today is not Lore's past, but how she guides us into the future. I, for one, am dedicated to preserving her legacy and to firmly anchor her as a writer, especially in the German-speaking world. And you're probably not aware of this, except for Ladies' Lunch, the two translated books of Lore's Other People's Houses and The Absence of Cousin, or Shakespeare's Kitchen, which were translated into German, were out of print, and are really sorely missed by readers. Firstly, I'm working on her biography. Secondly, I'm working with a group of passionate fans in Vienna on renaming her beloved Hammerling Park, named after a 19th century author whose work included anti-Semitic tropes, into Lore Segal Park. Thirdly, we will also approach the owners of the building on Josefstädter Straße 81 to 83, Lore's Viennese home, to install a plaque honoring her and her family's life and remembering their forceful expulsion from Vienna. Fourthly, a group of us is also hoping to convince the Vienna city government to distribute 100,000 copies of Other People's Houses free of charge during the One City, One Book campaign in 2028, to mark not only the 90 years that have elapsed since the Anschluss, but also to mark what would have been Lore's 100th birthday. In addition, when David, B, Jean, and Lena came to Vienna last year for the opening, we explored the buildings where Lore's extended family lived and from where they were deported. We have approached an association in Vienna to install stones of memory in Hollandstrasse 8 to remember Lore's favorite great-aunt Frida, Löwy, her husband Alfred, and Lore's great-uncle Karl Benedict. And last but not least, I'm also hoping to stage a newly reimagined exhibition on Lore's life and work here at the Leo Baeck Institute sometime soon. If you would like to play a part in preserving Lore's legacy, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. As Bibi says, every family needs a historian, a family historian, who we can turn to with questions. Who was that person? Karen will know. So I'm Jean Hawley. I'm the partner of Jacob, Lore's son, Jacob, and I'm an adopted child of Lore. At age 22, I cut off from half my family due to alcoholism and violence. And some years later, 5 years later, Lore stepped in and filled that gap. And so did the rest of her family. So I'm angry she's gone, since I didn't have her for the full amount of my life, but I'm deeply grateful that I had her as long as I did. So I'd like to ask her beloved daughter, Beatrice Ann Segal, to come up and speak first.
Okay. Thank you. First, I want to thank the Leo Baeck Institute for hosting this event. We're very grateful, and particularly Michael for all your help in putting this event together. Can you hear me? Okay. And for answering all my emails, even the ones that I sent at really unfair hours of the evening and weekends. When thinking of what to write about my mother, who was my parent, my source of comfort, my companion, my gentle, sometimes not so gentle critic, and my friend, and always the smartest person in the room, I come back to the notion of perfection. Although she was not a perfect mother, she was good, very good. As a child, she spent a lot of time with us, but often I could feel that while with us, a part of her was still half thinking about what she had written that day and was rewriting it. Then she had the tragedy of being a single parent, which made being as present a parent as one would want more difficult. But she did want us to have adventures. She encouraged us to go out in the world and explore the world, and gave us freedoms, such as traveling and wandering the city at a young age. And when we were young, if she was worried or anxious about us, when we were out exploring, she didn't tell us. Of course, that changed as she got older, but she was as close to perfect a grandmother as possible. She loved her grandkids, admired them, appreciated them, taught them, and talked to them endlessly about their shared interests. She strove for perfection in so many things. Nothing was too small or insignificant to do well, and most importantly, with beauty. from how she made her bed or demanded that it be made, with not one crease, to how she dressed herself, what jewelry went best with what shirt, and which of her many colored scarves to adorn herself with. She was perfect in how she decorated her home. She chose the perfect items, be they tchotchkes or art, and placed them in just the right position on their own and in relation to each other. Even with her deteriorating vision, she could see if one beautiful thing was out of place. And if there was too many papers or clutter, they had to be put away to avoid her favorite phrase, visual noise. Although she borrowed that from somebody, I can't remember who. She had beautiful containers for everything, beautiful paperclip holders, beautiful pill holders, filing cabinets, eyeglass holders, you get the point. She showed perfection in how she cooked. She had a knack for making very complicated recipes with finesse, down to how she set the table and displayed the food. If you were cutting a slice of cheese, you had to cut it so that the piece of cheese looked like it hadn't even been cut, along the straight line. When you were serving grapes, they had to be cut off the vine perfectly so that you saw more grape, a little vine, but not too much vine. She was a perfect friend, available when they needed her. If she made a date, she refused to change it, even if for a family event that she had forgotten about. Friends knew they'd always have good conversations, and she'd want to know about them. And she always had a knack for pinpointing the most interesting part of whatever they were talking about and raising it to even a more fascinating level. She knew when to play devil's advocate and when to agree or when to avoid a tough conversation for the sake of her relationship with others. Well, mostly. She did argue with a select few, but she enjoyed those arguments. But of course, the area she was most perfect in was her writing. Watching her write was watching an artist paint. Be it a story, novel, essay, or email, she worked on it, wrote, deleted words, added words, thought about it, and rewrote it until it was perfect. She needed to find the right word, unable to relax until she did. On many occasions, I would help her write emails. And by the way, you could not start an email with hey or hi or hello. It had to be dear, or to family sometimes, dearest. Long after I thought we were done, I would say, come on, Mom, we're done. She came up with the perfect alignment of words to say exactly what she meant as concisely as possible. Each email a work of art, perfectly said. Lore, she had said that she never quite understood something or an experience until she had written about it. One of my greatest thrills was writing a children's book with her, which, by the way, nobody wants to publish. But it was a master class in writing concisely and with grace. Sorry. Yeah. In my own writing, I continue to work on taking away superfluous words with limited success. Even her death, though I can't use the word perfect, was well done. Often I think she couldn't have written a better story about dying. First, she had an amazing final year of literary success with, thanks to Sort of Books in England and Melville House here, the publication of Ladies' Lunch. Shortly after redoing her will, she started feeling more and more tired. She was very scared of going blind and hated that she could do less and less on her own. Her bad teeth made eating a chore not a pleasure, so she began to talk about how to exit on her terms. The week before she entered hospice, she finished her last story, ending with what many of us think was her most beautiful Ladies' Lunch story, returning to her origin, a story of the Holocaust. She sent them off to and got them accepted by the New Yorker. She knew there would be a beautiful profile written about her in the New York Times. She insisted on being part of the world and making decisions about her care for as long as she could. She shed no tears, no anger, but spent a beautiful few months with family. Jacob, Jean, David, and I read to her, talked to her, told her how much we loved her and her us. Until the end, she was giving us lessons in how to read Jane Austen and Shakespeare. Ben came 3 times to see her and showed her a few of his movies, minutes of his movies. Isaiah took great care of her, feeding her, arranging her flowers, watching videos of art in the Met and National Gallery with her. Lena visited and drew her beloved view of the Upper West Side skyline for her to admire. Good and loving, loyal friends and cousins came to see her over and over and over, all of which made her feel very loved, and as she said, she was having too good a time when she's supposed to be dying. Of course, she wasn't perfect, but she was a wonderful teacher, daughter, niece, mother, grandmother, cousin, friend, writer, lover, and I am forever grateful she was my mom. She used to say to me, aren't I lucky to have a daughter who spent so much time with me? But as I told her, I was the lucky one, the lucky daughter who had a mother with whom I loved spending so much time. I will end with what might be a perfect list of books to read, which she told me shortly before she died, were her top 10 books, but now I realize there are actually 12. And in some cases, because she loved the author so much, she chose 2 books. So you have a choice. The list is outside in the guest book if you want to have a look. But the books are Persuasion or Emma, David Copperfield, In Search of Lost Time, or the first English translation called Remembrance of Things Past, especially Swan's Way, The Ambassadors, or Portrait of a Lady, War and Peace, or Anna Karenina, The Brothers Karamazov, The Trial, or The Castle, 100 Years of Solitude, As I Lay Dying, or as she said, Annie Faulkner, Dead Souls, Pinin, King Lear, and no book list is complete without mentioning the Bible. Thank you to all of you for being here with us today to celebrate the life of Lore and honor her.
Next, I'd like to ask Lore's beloved son-in-law, David Barry Segal, to come up. He took Bibi's last name when they got married.
Thanks, Jean. Thanks for this, too. Jean and Jacob got me this beautiful thing. If I were to talk about Lore, I wouldn't know where to begin, or maybe I wouldn't know where to end. Sorry. So I'm going to read a little from some of her work. I'm going to read the last section of Other People's Houses, her first book. She published in 1964. I should say the David that's mentioned is the man she married, who she's going to break down, and maybe I'm the one who's going to break down. Jacob and Beatrice's father, and his name was David Segal too. So whenever she'd mention him, when I was around, she'd have to clarify, like, the original David Segal. Goodbye, oh mama, I said. I have to meet a friend on Riverside Drive. And because my grandmother asked me no questions, I said, his name is David. Come back soon, she said. That corner of 74th Street still has the power to move me to a dry sort of tears, like sinuses aching behind the eyes. I walked out of the nursing home with a gasp of joy into the city, lying in the exhaustion of the late afternoon heat. Behind me, lovely Central Park was green, and the young girl crossing at Columbus Avenue swung her meager shoulders and swished her gay skirt printed with orange, black, and turquoise galleys. It had pyramids in the background, which hit me familiarly, so that I followed her a block uptown to get a closer look, and yes, no hand but mine could have painted that awkward curl of the prow. It was a quote-unquote conversation print of the Egyptian period, which preceded the Roman era and placed the fabric squarely in my year at the Polacek studio. I turned down Amsterdam Avenue, assailed suddenly by a complexity of misery in which I tasted the familiar ingredients of loneliness and shame and the beginnings of nausea. And stopping for the light at the corner of Broadway, I looked inward, wondering what was the matter now. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the marquee of the Hotel X and recalled intact the dimly lit dance hall and myself softening experimentally in the arms of the sad and beastly electrician. New York is as full of my past as of my old textile designs, walking about its streets. On 57th Street, for instance, there is a car dealer of the same name as the editor who turned down my first story. And every time the Fifth Avenue bus carries me past his sign, I feel an embarrassment grown so faint by now that I hardly bother to diagnose its cause. It is, I think, the way our histories become charged thus upon the air, the streets, the very houses of New York, that makes the alien into a citizen. The traffic lights had changed, and I crossed Broadway. At West End Avenue, I caught the warm wind stirring from the river and saw David waving from a bench under the heavy summer trees. My grandmother died the night of her 81st birthday and was buried in a huge graveyard in New Jersey. My mother lives alone on 157th Street. Davy and I were married and moved to an apartment in Midtown. Like the little dog who turns and turns around himself to shape a place in the earth to fit his own proportions, I hunted the antique shops until I found our dining table. drop leaf, 18th century, and English. David said, "You don't think Queen Anne might be misplaced on West 72nd Street?" I said, "Yes, but please, I need it." And so we made ourselves a home. I keep looking around me. The war is still cold and overseas. No one of my people this moment is ill. Every day there are hours when I can write, and we have our friends. My husband is Jewish too, but he was born in America and accepts without alarm this normal season of our lives. But I, now that I have children and am about the age my mother was when Hitler came, walk gingerly and in astonishment upon this island of my comforts, knowing that it is surrounded on all sides by calamity. Thanks. The second and last thing I'm going to read is the last story published in her lifetime. It was published in the New Yorker the week she died. I should also say this story too is kind of ominous, and I wanted to read maybe another section because she was very funny, of course, everyone who knew her and you read her writing. She was a very funny writer, but I didn't want to run too much over my time span. But I'll say that Ben is going to follow me, and Ben is going to show a movie he made, which is funny. So that'll offset this. Who is outside? Ladies' movie night. The friends who have become less and less willing to leave their homes agree to watch a movie on the TV and then meet on Zoom to talk. But here Ilka proves, as she herself says, a dead loss. I turned it off before the tall guy who doesn't know is about to walk into the room. But that's the payoff for all that good suspense. Actually, there's some funny stuff here. Bessie says, "That's the edge of the chair moment we've been waiting for. That's why I turned it off," Ilka said. "You don't like suspense? Hate it. Can't stomach suspense. I mean that my physical stomach does a number on me. And last week you didn't finish watching The Quiet Place, and that was a nice suspense, a happy ending." Ilka says there are no happy endings. "It's odd," Bessie says, "because you always seem the most reasonable one of us." "I've been having nasty nights," says Ilka. "Here is something they all understand. You don't sleep and you have horrible dreams." "A revolving dream," Ilka says, "in which I must find a rhyme like an algebra problem going around and around and around. It's this poem I'm trying to translate. Theodor Kramer was a poet in Vienna in the 30s, a Jew, my Uncle Paul's favorite writer. I've got the first verse. Who is outside ringing at the door, and we not even out of bed? I'll go, love, and take a look. Only the boy who came and left the bread. But the second verse, who is outside ringing at the door? You stay, dear. It was a man talking with the neighbors, asking who we are. When the word doesn't meet its own rhyme, we are puzzled, and then we doubt, says Ilka. Lucinella suggests, how about you stay, my dear, and asking who we were? A false rhyme, but Ilka says no, or maybe yes. Let it stand for the moment. She adds, it's not the night so much as the morning hour, the hideous re-entry into the day. The day, mind you, which I rather like. I do. I like my old lady's life quite well enough. What I mean is the ugly hour before I'm awake, the necessity to wake up. Remember Lottie, the everlasting questioner, asking, so what is that all about? Why do you? Why did you? She would ask. And I understood that I was not so interested, that I don't much believe in my explanations. But may I read you the rest of the poem, and maybe you can find me a title. Who is outside ringing at the door? Go, love, and run the bath. The mail has come, but not the letter we were waiting for. Who is outside ringing at the door? Go, my darling, turn the beds about. It was the super. First of next month, we have to be out. Who is outside ringing at the door? How the fuchsias bloom so near. Dearest, pack me my toothbrush and don't cry. They are here. Vienna, 1938. Thank you.
So next, we're going to see a film by Lore's much beloved first grandchild, Benjamin Isaac Segal, Isaac, after the original David Isaac Segal. And Benjamin brought us together. He was like a fire in the fireplace. We would gather around his crib, 6 huge adult heads gazing down at this smiling baby. He was lovely and still is. He's going to have us watch before he comes up.
Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Lori.
When do you have to leave?
In like 10 minutes.
Make your bed, won't you, before you leave?
I will.
Ben, you think you have 10 minutes?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Ben, did you make your bed? 10 minutes isn't a long time.
Oh shit, 10 minutes?
Ben, would you deal something with them?
Good thinking.
Ben, put it in the dishwasher.
Hang out, Lori.
Ben, could you take the trash on your way out? I don't understand this. How can anyone see on this thing? I'm trying to make it big and it just keeps getting smaller. I don't know what's going on here.
Command and plus sign.
How do you do that? Command plus sign?
Sign, Lori, like in math.
I don't know what you're talking
Look,
about.
hold the plus sign and I'll hold this one. Press these two together to zoom in.
What? Wow, how did you do that?
Here's a practice.
Love you, Ben.
Love you too, Lori.
Give my love to your kidlets.
I lived with Lori in the summers of 2016 to 2019 while I worked at my summer camp job. We were distinct opposites as to how we went about our lives. Our characters in this short were exaggerated, yes, but very much based on us. When I coined this idea to make a little short film with her, she didn't know what this journey entailed, but she was already gung-ho, excited to support me more than anything, really. Or maybe, also, for the chance to explore another form of storytelling that she hadn't tried before. Always ready to tell a new story, she jumped into the great unknown with me, somehow as her guide, student leading the professor. Except she didn't make it feel like that, nor did she ever. We were just two collaborators figuring it out together. I taught her how to operate the camera, she taught me how to write dialogue. We workshopped the lines I wrote for us while shooting, and of course she made them infinitely better. When I busted my ass, in one of the shots that we didn't use, I busted my ass falling on the floor. I told her to cut the video. I shot up, ignoring the shooting pain I gave myself, unsure if what we got was good enough. I turned to her, ready to ask how it looked, and she was already answering my question, laughing with fascination and delight. Childlike wonder that she somehow kept with her in her old age, all the way to the very end. She did argue with the process when she didn't understand what was happening. That scene where we were bickering about the laptop, I filmed the footage first, then we recorded audio after. In the actual moment of recording footage, there was honest bickering, me incorrectly explaining what to do and how it would look to our audience, and she was just trying to understand what I was imagining. Every moment I spent with her was a learning lesson. Those bickering sessions, deep discussions on the human condition we would have ever since I could remember, shaped me into who I am. Challenging what I thought I knew, opening my mind to new perspectives. Not only did she give me not only did she gift me with my love for storytelling, for adventure, she also instructed me on how to seek out the hidden beauty in this godforsaken world. While I don't yet know how I can live on without her, nor if such a beast can be conquered, she's given me the tools, the strength, and the childlike curiosity to find out. Thank you.
Lore had two full cousins, children of the brother of her mother, Peter and John Stern, and she adored them both all the way through their lives together. Peter is going to come up and say a few words now.
Hello, Ben. Pretty damn good. And I know how much Laura must have loved that film. Did she? I'm sure Laura loved that. Absolutely. So I'm Peter Stern, Laura's first cousin, though we're separated by 24 years. Unless I'm mistaken, my brother John and I go back further with Laura than anyone here, 72 and 71 years respectively. Can anyone top that? Jackie? Oh. Sorry about that. But pretty far back. So I'm going to go off script here and just comment that as I look around here, I count 14 relatives of Lore, including myself, which is a record, as far as I'm concerned, exceeding even Benji's bar mitzvah. When my wife Lore and I learned that Laura had died, we were in Portugal. We decided on a course of action. Drink white wine, we already had a head start, and be happy for Laura's life. By the way, if anyone knows where the wine is, let me know. That's the way I feel about this occasion today. Happy. With all the well-deserved tributes and accolades, let's make sure this is atop the list. Laura was a wonderful mother and an awesome grandmother. Laura first astonished me at the age of about 5 by standing on her head in our tiny Bronx living room, one of my earliest memories. When I reminded her of this in one of our last visits, she said, "That's how I want you to remember me." The astonishments continued across the decades. We all have our own treasured inventories. The last one came after she entered hospice. I'm dying, but I'm okay. No remembrance of Laura could be complete without some words about her mother, my Aunt Francie. Francie's courage in sending away her 10-year-old child to escape Vienna very possibly saved Laura's life. Francie was tough, but loving, brutally honest, and hilariously funny. As a refugee, she assisted on night patrols on the streets of her town in England to spot incoming Luftwaffe aircraft. With her devoted care of young Jacob and Beatrice, Laura was able to teach and to write. Gratitude doesn't begin to describe what Francie is owed. I want to say a few personal words about Laura's husband, David. Come on. As a confused boy of about 10, trying to figure out where I fit in, David, in particular regard to our small extended New York family, was my first American. He had no European accent. He knew all about sports, the Knicks, the Rangers, the Giants, things totally foreign to my totally foreign family. He and Laura took us to the Freedom Land amusement park on the current site of Co-op City. David had a wonderful wry sense of humor, to wit, his attempt at German. Ich bin blaue Bleistift. I am a blue pencil. Here are some words from an email Lore sent me 20 years ago, maybe words for all of us at her loss. My mother was dying, and I worried about my father, Paul, her beloved uncle. Don't worry, Lore said. He has a steady and powerful acceptance of what is. Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from one of Lore's closest friends, Susan Salm, who will be playing us a Bach suite for cello. This is what she would play for Lore through COVID. Susan was at the time in Vienna, and the two of them would have a Zoom date, also with Susan's husband, Frieder, who was also a very close friend. They'd do a Zoom date, and Susan, all the way from Vienna, would play the cello for Lore, bringing her live music. This part I would do before the Zoom. So she didn't have to wait like you have to now. Lore loved Bach, and she loved Susan. Next, we'll hear from the publishing house that did so much with and for Lore, Melville House, Valerie Marins.
Water. Wow, there's a lot of people here. Okay, can you hear me? So first, thank you to Beatrice and Jacob and Lore's family for inviting me up here. I'm Valerie Marins, co-founder and publisher with my husband, Dennis Johnson, of Melville House, and we are the publishers of Lore's last 4 books. As a writer, Lore was constantly in motion. I'm sure she didn't feel that way, but it was true. She was always at her desk, writing, revising some more. When Philip Roth announced that he was done writing, I asked her if she would ever stop, and she said, "What would I do with my hands every day between 10 and 1? So the idea of stopping was preposterous to her, really. Writing was not an exercise outside of her real life, like a job. It was how she lived. It was how she made sense of the world, and it was how she interacted with the world. And everything that happened in that world was potentially, as she and the journalists like to say, copy. Everything was copy. Falling down, a visit to the hospital, lunch. Everything was potentially useful. Everything was interesting. A favorite word of hers we'll all probably be using a lot today. In an interview about one of her ladies' lunch stories, she told Cressida LaShawn, her wonderful editor and great champion at The New Yorker, "My old ladies are observing themselves growing old and older. Their vision deteriorates, their memory fails, but they keep discovering that they like the interesting business of living. Note the pleasure with the interesting business of living. Deteriorating vision, memory loss, copy. Interesting." Lore's understanding of both life and art was fundamentally an aesthetic one. She was not a parochially moral writer, which is perhaps surprising in a writer who had fled the Nazis, or perhaps not. She was a writer with a grand aesthetic sense of life. She observed the complexity, humor, tragedy, pain, accommodations, and self-deceptions of us humans with compassion and a gentle, ironic detachment. And then she presented it to her readers very carefully with a finely honed exactness. And that pursuit of exactness was never at rest. Lore told the story once of walking up Broadway and suddenly realizing that a word she'd used in a story 50 years earlier wasn't exactly the word she had meant, okay? It wasn't a useless bosom she'd given to a woman in a story, but an unused bosom. So sweet. And that slight change in word choice was at work and in her subconscious for 50 years. So I got to see this up close once when she did a reading for Melville House's 2009 reissue of Lucinella, her 1976 novella. After the reading, I caught a glimpse inside the copy of the book she was reading from, completely marked up. Ink everywhere on the page, words crossed out, arrows going, every which way. And I say again, this was a book originally published in 1976. The event I'm talking about was in 2009. When I commented on the state of her reading copy, she said, "Oh, no, this would never do now." As if the book was never finished. It continued on in her mind and it was only natural that she would re-enter it. And this constant refining of her prose made editing Lore a real joy. It was a joy to work up close with such lapidary language. And I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you all if I say she was very strong-willed. She knew exactly what she wanted to say, and she knew exactly how she wanted to say it. One day we were working on a section in Half the Kingdom, which is a book we did with her, where an elderly man has had a stroke and he is lying helpless on the beach, unable to move. And the tide is coming in slowly, slowly. It's covering first his toes, then his ankles, and he can't move. It's truly terrifying. Finally, when rescuers do arrive, all he sees is a forest of young legs around him. It's a beautiful moment, observing the healthy young limbs from his vantage point. She captured it all perfectly, with great economy. And then she added that the legs looked like they were from Marcel Duchamp's famous painting, Nude Descending a Staircase. Now, I understood why she liked that, but to me, it took away from the naturalistic magic of that moment she had created. And so we tussled about it, and she would not back down. So eventually I caved. Marcel Duchamp was going to be sticking his big European high modernist nose into her lovely American beach scene. All right. So fast forward through the manuscript, leaving my hands, going on through copy editing, proofing, layout, blah, blah, blah. Finally, publication. The book arrives in the office. I pick it up, and I'm reading it, and eventually I'm reading that scene. And damn, if it is not there. She cut somewhere during proofing and copy editing or something. She had taken out Marcel Duchamp. So when I asked her about it, she just gave me a sly smile. She was content. That was a good cut. So editing Lore was always a surprise, and therefore always fun and exciting, which was much like being in her company. As I am sure you know, she was always puzzling over some human behavior or other. It could be something perfectly banal, but would seem so strange and wondrous to her. For example, she would ask with genuine curiosity and enthusiasm, why is it that we don't like criticism? And I never doubted that whatever answers she would come up with to these kinds of questions would make their way into her next story, and they invariably did. And it was this close entwinement of her living and her thinking and her writing that created the very unique signature of her prose and of her storytelling. Because Lore lived her art so intimately and so intensely, it's as though she has imbued her essence into the art that she left us. And through that art, I miss her lively, ever-questioning, ever-revising self just a little bit less. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear from some of Lore's many students. It'll be 5 in a row that were among the most beloved of those. All of them became dear friends and even family. So right now we'll start with Laura Geringer-Bass, Robert McDonald, and Dorotea Mendoza. Laura organized a writing class that all of us stayed in for 15 years.
It was more than 15 years for me, so it's almost 2 decades, 2006. So I'm Dorotea.
Robbie McDonald. We came about 4 years apart, I guess.
So for nearly 2 decades, we met with Lore for seasonal weekly writing workshops, which were really more than a workshop. And I would put it on my calendar as the session with the Lore crew. And there are others here from that crew who are here in person and maybe some on Zoom.
Yes, the group has been together more or less for 12, 15 years, I would say. Laura, who you hear from shortly, Elizabeth is here. Stand up, if you don't mind. Martin is here. Martin, stand up if you don't mind, if you can. We're as old as Lore now. We're students. I mean, Marjorie, I don't know if she's here or not. Marjorie Tesser. Ken is here. Ken can stand up. Is Marjorie here?
She's on Zoom.
Oh, she's on Zoom. Is this Zoom now?
Go on. We have limited time.
Okay. George Baer, Judith Lichtendorf. Bob is here. I know Bob can stand up. Jenny, obviously, right here. Jean right here. And Jenny is here, right?
I don't think so.
No, not. Okay, that's the list. All right. That's it. I'm done.
So thank you so much to Lore's family for having us here. And I'm going to go off script, Laura, because I know I'm going to regret it if I don't share this story with you. So we would meet at around 7 or 6:30 at her house, but sometimes she would ask me to come earlier to help her trim her ficus tree. If you've been to her apartment, there's a ficus tree right next to the piano by the window. So one time, I came in with my shears. I don't know why she thought I was good at this. Anyway, so I came in with my shears and she said, I just want that one little branch taken off. So we took that off. Done. She says, doesn't look balanced. All right, let's take this other one off. We ended up taking off 6. Just get it right, just like in writing. And she let me take one of those branches. She kept the rest. And I rooted that branch. I now have 2 trees from that branch, and I'm rooting a 3rd one. The ones that she kept did not root. And now Laura Geringer-Bass, she will read something she's written on behalf of the group.
Hi. 10 of us, sometimes 11, sometimes 12, had the joy of being members of Lore's Thursday night writing workshop for 15 plus years. Before the pandemic, we gathered in her living room, and then we adapted to Zoom. A friend of mine the other day spoke about a beloved friend of his who had died about 20 years earlier. He said he still missed her laugh and the treasured quirks of her physical appearance. He missed having dinners and drinks with her, and he found that over the years, their dialogue and conversations continued. I imagine for all of us who were lucky enough to know Lore, we will continue to have conversations with her until we too die, for how not? Lore taught us to have the best, no-nonsense conversations with her and with one another. and also with the characters we wrote about in our stories and flashes and books. Well, maybe no nonsense is not the right term. She loved to play with words, with ideas, but I mean no nonsense in the sense of drifting down to the heart, the meat of things, the stuff that was most real about a thought, a memory, a statement, an observation, an image. Her curiosity touched us, enlivened us. Lore taught us not to stint on praise of our fellow writers, to be honest, but to look first with kindness for what we liked in a piece, what moved us to admiration or just moved us. She marked those passages with light checks in pencil, and later, when her failing eyesight no longer allowed her to pencil comments, she substituted bold keyboard exclamation points. Lore taught us to ask what the writer is trying to say, not what you, the reader, wants or expects to hear. If a metaphor was interesting but didn't quite work, she never advised the easy way out. Rather than deleting it, she encouraged us to explore the words, the sentences, to deconstruct them, to free associate, until it became clear to us what we were going after, what was obscuring the memory or making it opaque, and what would clarify it when we put it back together another way. You know how to do it, she would say, except I don't have Lore's beautiful Viennese lilt. Karen, maybe you can, you know how to do it. And when she said it that way, so sure it was true, it seemed in that moment and beyond that we did know how to do it. In addition to the Lore in our heads, we have, thank goodness, the Lore in her books. Lore at all ages and stages of life. Child, teenager, refugee, mother, writer, consummate observer, master of her craft, and the finest of teachers, with a voice that never falters or strikes a false note. Funny, devastating, bold, brilliant, generous, and always, always herself. When I look at photos of Lore as a child, I feel I know that child. Don't you? Because Lore managed to be the real Lore all the way through her entire life, through and through, the real Lore. Lore's workshop is still meeting, and we plan to continue to meet. We will always call ourselves Lore's Workshop. For now and the next while, in addition to reading one another's writing, we plan to read Lore's books, from her first Other People's Houses to her last Ladies' Lunch story. We plan to celebrate her together and to continue our interesting talks with one another and with Lore. In Other People's Houses, the displaced child Lore looks into the future and tells her friend Gwenda, I'm going to have lots of friends, poets and people like that. It's so good to be here with all of you, Lore's cherished family, and her lots of friends. Thank you.
Lore loved Laura and Robbie and Dorothea, Ken and Martin, Bob, Liz, Jenny, so many. But without Laura, who became Lore's very good friend, the class wouldn't have kept going. I would help Lore clean up afterwards, and Lore would look at me and say, they're all so good. Everybody's really talented in that class. Okay, the next person is Jeffrey Renard Allen. who was first a student of Lore's and then a dear friend of Lore's and then family of Lore's. And unfortunately, he's been in Johannesburg. That's not the unfortunate part. That's really nice. But his flight, things went awry, so he's flying back today and isn't able to be here. So I'll read a piece for Lore from Jeff. Just get my water. Sorry. I apologize. Jeffrey Renard Allen. Greetings, everyone. I'm sorry that I cannot be with you all today on this important occasion celebrating the life of Lore Segal. I knew Lore for more than 4 decades. Much to say indeed. However, I will be brief. I first met Lore in 1981 when I was 19 years old and enrolled as an undergraduate student at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where she was on the faculty in the English department. I took her fiction workshop, my very first creative writing workshop. I remember Lore as smart and stylish and sophisticated, with a series of metal bracelets that moved noisily along one arm. There was a living author in the flesh. She mentioned authors and books I had never heard of, and she had much to say about them. When we discussed both published texts and student manuscripts, she placed great emphasis on sentences and syntax and word choices, where subsequent teachers looked more at story and structure. I enjoyed Lore, enjoyed her teaching style, her manner of speaking that was intelligent and offhand at once. And I appreciated the fact that she seemed to take an interest in me for some reason. Shy and quiet, I sat at the back of the room, hoping to lay back in the cut and be ignored. But Lore took every opportunity to force me to speak, to share my opinions, and so it went. It goes without saying, I learned much. I took many other classes with Lore, both workshops and literature courses. That was how we began, as professor and student. Looking back, searching for lost time, I can't pinpoint the moment we became friends. Blame my poor memory. But I will say that the year 1990 was a turning point in our relationship. One day on campus, Lore approached me and told me she thought it would be a good idea for me to come to New York and try to find an agent to represent my work. She had a plane ticket for me. I could stay in the spare bedroom of her apartment, and she also had an agent in mind that she wanted me to meet, a youngish woman named Cynthia Cannell, who was a junior agent at Janclo and Nesbitt, the agency that represented Lore. New York was a life-changing experience. I had to live in the city. In 1992, after I graduated from the University of Illinois at Chicago, I landed a job at Queens College in Flushing. One of the great things about living in New York was that I got to see Lore often, on the regular, usually at her 12th floor apartment on Riverside Drive. She was both a mentor and a friend. At some point, she became my second mother. Lore and I first hit it off over our love for literature. Then we hit it off over life. Older and wiser, Lore was quick to challenge my many boneheaded ideas. I was full of those. I still am. Like most Americans, I was idealistic and innocent, ignorant to the ways of the larger world, whereas Lore was old world in her outlook, European. Once I remember her saying to me, "I don't know why I'm so pessimistic. Things always work out for the best for me." Yes, she said, but they don't work out for the best for everyone else in the world. This coming from a survivor of the European Holocaust. As Americans, we came close to Lore's perspective in only one native idiom, the blues. The blues tells us always to expect the unexpected. Why? Because shit happens. Through Lore's tutelage, I like to think that I now share Lore's old world sensibility and perspective. Perhaps this is why I'm so drawn to Africa. We differed only in that Lore was always secular in her outlook, while I maintain a belief in a higher power. Indeed, I would best describe myself as a born-again pagan. As a writer, what I learned most from Lore was to take as much time as you need to get a manuscript right. Lore was a slow writer. I am a slow writer. On more than one occasion, I would share an early draft of something with her, and she would respond by saying just that. "Jeff, I can see this is an early draft." Lore and I shared a love for many writers, including Chekhov and Henry James, among others. However, as writers, we were on different ends of the aesthetic and stylistic spectrum, with her being lean and precise, and me being baroque and expansive. But she always understood my work and could speak intelligently about it so as to be helpful and constructive. Be that as it may, I was not always able to get Lore to like some of my more idiosyncratic artists. I remember that first trip to New York and can see Lore and I sitting in her living room listening to the album by Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet. I remember going on and on, talking about how I was trying to write like that. The numerous references, the layers of sound, the multiple voices, the call and response, the embedded history and culture, and so on. She didn't get it. Then she played Brahms for me. "This is how I would like to write," she said. Lore and I shared many moments like this. My mentor, my mother. As with any mother, she was always available for me with advice and assistance. She saw me at my best. She saw me at my worst. In either instance, she was loving, supportive. I last saw Lore in May of last year in her Riverside apartment. We enjoyed a meal, although she ate little, only a few bites of food. She was crestfallen, melancholic, largely over the state of the nation. For her, Trumpism brought back memories of the rise of Hitler. I longed to say or do something to lift her spirits, but what? Of course, Lore was right, even then. Lore, I salute you. I miss you. I wish you were here, but you are now sleeping with the ancestors. Until we meet again, thank you all. Now I'll invite up another student, another very dear friend who dedicated a book to Lore, and that really meant a lot to her. Matthew Sharp.
Matt, tell me, why do we not like boasting? Please forgive the mediocre Lore impression. I've been missing her voice, so I sometimes attempt to coax it out of myself for comfort. She was often working on this kind of problem. some element of human behavior or predilection so widely accepted that one would not question it were one not Lore. And once she'd gotten him settled on the couch in the living room of apartment 12K with a glass of seltzer and some mixed nuts in front of him, she would spring the problem on a visitor. It was framed as a question whose subject was the first person plural pronoun. Why do we not like boasting? She assumed you shared the burden the problem presented, and she wanted you also to share the fun of attempting to solve it with her. Observing my sputtering response to this particular question, she was ready to lighten my burden with a corollary question. Are there exceptions to the prescription against boasting? This I did have an answer to, the tradition of braggadocio in hip-hop music, in which an artist extols his handsomeness, wealth, sexual prowess, or rhyming skill. Her answer was the character called God in the Old Testament, who, in a very lopsided rap battle with Job, pointed out that only one of them had created the earth. Lore, of course, was thinking of the problem in more encompassing terms than I was. Continuing this conversation with Lore years later, in her painful absence, it occurs to me that the pronoun par excellence of boasting is I. We can boast too if we are an excluding we, a superior we that assumes an inferior you. This is not Lore's we. The playful hyperbolic tradition in hip-hop notwithstanding, boasting or being boasted to is inherently divisive. Lore's we is an anti-divisive device. How lucky I feel to be here with all of you in a little fragment of that group Lore included when she uttered that first-person plural pronoun, namely, all us humans. My friendship with her, that 35-year-long conversation, has been one of the highlights of my life. I will quickly sketch for you the two bookends of that conversation because both were memorable. I met Lore in 1988 at the first meeting of a fiction writing workshop she was teaching at the 92nd Street Y, which of course she held in the living room of apartment 12K. During the caesura midway through the class, I asked her where the bathroom was. She grinned at me, pointed her finger, and said, "Follow the signs." I left the living room, passed through the dining area, and on the door of the smaller of the two bedrooms, I saw a handwritten sign that said, "This is not the bathroom," with an arrow pointing to the right, which led me down a short hallway, at the end of which was an ajar door with a second handwritten sign, "This too is not the bathroom," with an arrow pointing to the left, which led me through the larger bedroom to a third door on which was posted a third handwritten sign, "This is the bathroom." Only Lore Segal, with a few dashed off signs, could have turned her Upper West Side rent-stabilized apartment into an object lesson for an aspiring fiction writer in how to construct a 3-act quest narrative. The other bookend, the last time I saw Lore alive, happened in the summer of 2024. By then, she was confined to a hospital bed in the larger of the two bedrooms of apartment 12K, facing that room's southern window. I asked her how it was to reside round the clock in that bed. She said, again grinning and pointing, "Well, look," inviting me to see the magnificence of the view of Manhattan that was keeping her entertained day and night. That is, inviting me to see what she saw as she saw it. I can't help construing this as a larger object lesson which she offered up from this smaller spatial configuration within that same apartment. That even if one had had bad dreams, and Lore had been made to inhabit among the worst dreams humans have dreamt for ourselves, Even then, one could still be bounded in a nutshell and count oneself a queen or king of infinite space. I shared my last visit to Lore in late July of 2024 with Beatrice and David and James and Nina. And if anyone else was there and I've not mentioned you, please forgive my less than godlike short-term memory. Part way into the visit, David walked into the room and announced that Joe Biden had suspended his campaign for presidency and anointed Kamala Harris as his successor. We all immediately dove into discussing this turn of events. This was about the best crew I could have hoped to absorb that complicated bit of news with. At one point, Lore turned to me and said, "I'm having so much fun, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do." I said, "What are you supposed to do?" Again with the grin, she said, "Die." Lore being Lore, she did both. Thank you.
And next, I'll invite up Lore's good friend and reading group co-member and at times editor, who at times was a little too slow to respond, James Marcus.
Slow to get to the podium. Well, that was so eloquent, Matt. This will be like following Tina Turner up here now, frankly, but I'll do my best. More and more, it seems to me that among the many possible relations between consenting adults, that the one between writer and reader is the most intimate of all. In any case, that certainly must account for a strange sense I had when I first met Lore, that I had already known her for a very long time. Now, of course, I had been reading her books for a long time, and so in a sense, I did know her, because when you immerse yourself in the work of a great writer, you are exposed to the inmost part of another human being. You learn things about them that probably their best friends don't know in a certain way. And so, of course, I had met her. I'd become intimately acquainted with her years before, but I actually met her in the flesh in 2009, so that is now about 16 years ago. I had just written a very positive review of Shakespeare's Kitchen in the Los Angeles Times Book Review, and Melville House was at that moment bringing out Lucinella, her novel. And so my friends at Melville House said, "Would you like to do an event with Lore at a bookstore? Would you like to interview her?" And I jumped at that opportunity and went to the bookstore on the appointed day, and here was this small, white-haired, delightful, witty human being. And we had our conversation, and I could tell it was going well because we both began to laugh during the exchange. I was asking her about her career as a writer. She was answering, and of course the career of a writer is full of sublimity, but also absurdity and frustration and beauty and all the things you find in the rest of life. And we just were chuckling over it, and I knew that we were connecting because of that. And at the end of the event, Lore said to me, we should have lunch. You know, we should continue our conversation. So shortly thereafter, I went up to her neighborhood. I think we went to an Indian restaurant, but I just really felt this instant camaraderie. And it was buttressed by my knowledge of her work, by that connection, but it was the connection to the person that meant so much to me. Now, my friendship with her then was, very luckily for me, compounded by getting to be Lore's editor. It was when I was at Harper's Magazine that we published a story that was called The Ice Worm in the magazine, but it was part of her then novel in progress, Half the Kingdom. It was an amazing privilege to get to work as an editor with a writer I had worshipped from afar for so long. Lore's, certainly in that case, her work didn't require a lot of editing. I only really worked on that one story for publication, but then once I had departed Harper's, Lore would sometimes send me stories that she was working on or parts of stories. And I mean, in that case, I was functioning as a kind of three-headed beast. I was triangulating between reader, friend, and editor. And often it would just be, one word, one sentence, the ending's not working. Sometimes I was slow, but I did learn my lesson and I sped up and then I was better. So, but anyway, it was in my capacity as Lore's friend, putting aside my great admiration for her as a writer, that I think brought me the most pleasure and was the most transforming in a way. Because Lore did have this marvelous openness to the world and to experience and to other people. To say, isn't this interesting, was a great mantra of hers, and other people have already alluded to it. But she did find everything interesting, and she did find all other human beings kind of fascinating subjects for speculation, trying to crack the nut of like, who is that person? Why were they behaving the way that they did? I found that very inspiring, and I think I inherited a little bit of it. It was bequeathed to me just from my long contact with her. Now, I don't want to suggest for one moment, by the way, that Lore was a Pollyanna of any kind, or that she was incapable of recognizing the awfulness that human beings are capable of, because she had been exposed to it very early in her own life. She wasn't naive about other people. She simply accepted the fallibility of all human beings. She took that as a given. Now, I want to read just a very brief sentence from one of her essays, because I thought she put her finger on this very beautifully. She says, "To be good, sane, happy is simple only if you subscribe to the Eden theory of original goodness, original sanity, and original happiness, which humankind subverted into a fascinating rottenness. Observation would suggest that we come by our rottenness aboriginally, and that rightness, like any other accomplishment, is something achieved." I love that little passage because it recognizes human beings for what they are, right? It's the rottenness that we didn't necessarily invent, that we inherited or had baked into us. And the struggle is to try to behave decently in spite of it. And I think Lore accomplished that kind of decency both in her life as a human being and a family member and a friend, and clearly as a teacher, and very much on the page. And I was vastly inspired by both of these parts of her life. I really want to conclude with just one final tiny little vignette, which is that a few years ago, when Lore was still well enough to leave her house, she was using her walker, which she called her chariot or her horse or various other things, but she would still leave the house. And a mutual friend of ours, Tony Halbert, wanted to take Lore out with some friends to an Austrian restaurant to let her partake again of the cuisine she had loved, as a child and continued to love. So our party went out. It was me and my partner Nina, who's here, and it was Vivian Gornick, who you'll hear from soon, from Tony Halbert and Lore. And we had this very nice Viennese dinner. Lore's appetite had abated a bit, but you could tell that she relished whatever bits she could eat. And at the end of the meal, we had been waited on by like a large, bearded and aproned Austrian maitre d'. And at the end of the meal, he also brought us our coats as we were leaving. And it was clear as he distributed the coats to one person after another that he had deduced what he thought was the family tree here. And so when he, gave Vivian her coat, he said, "For mother." And when he gave Tony his coat, he said, "For father." And for Lore, he gave her the coat and said, "For grandma." And it was clear to me that he had decided that Vivian and Tony were my parents and that Lore was my grandmother. And that, Nina was my charming new girlfriend I had brought to introduce to the family. And when I realized what was going on in this man's head, it was a signal moment of my life. I was so excited about it. And I mean, I should say, I had already had two perfectly fine grandmothers, so they were excellent. But to be inducted, even in this guy's mistake or fantasy, into Lore's tribe was really one of the greatest moments of my life. And I'm going to try to live up to it. I don't know if I can. The only last thing I would say is that with the people you love and with the writers you love, and I would say with Lore, those two kinds of love are inseparable, the conversation just never really ends. So although I can't really accept very easily that she is gone, I know that we'll just keep talking. So thank you very much.
I'd like to invite up now one of Lore's very best friends. There are a few here: Jackie Shapiro, Susan Salm, Vivian Gornick was a very best friend that came in the last 18 years or so. They'd known each other a long time, but Vivian became a member of the most inner circle. Please come up, Vivian.
Well, I have to say one of the most remarkable elements of this memorial is how many of us have experienced the same Lore Segal. And what I have to say, other writers have said already, but we can't say it enough, right? So here we go. Lore and I became friends some 20-odd years ago, which was already 20-odd years after we originally met. That first time must have been in the late 80s. She was, of course, already a famous Holocaust novelist, living on the family-oriented Upper West Side, securely ensconced in the New York literary scene. I, on the other hand, was divorced and childless, writing for a counterculture newspaper on the barricades for radical feminism, a writer who had yet to find her bearings. Our tendency when we met in those early years, always at the same kind of public affair, was to drift apart rather than come together. Time passed and neither of us made a move toward the other. Then we met again on a spring evening in the early 2000s, thrown together at a Greenwich Village party where we found ourselves amidst the din, sitting side by side on a small sofa. We began to chat, and somehow this time, we each found the sound of the other's voice pleasing, ourselves both delighted to be sharing opinions that now felt received rather than challenged, as so many exchanges between comparative strangers proved to be. Soon enough, the question of what we were working on came up, and I confided that I was writing a biography of the great feminist Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Lore turned full around on the sofa to face me squarely. "This feminism," she said, "tell me, what is it?" What is it that, I beg your pardon, what is it that you want? I don't think I've ever understood. The question startled me. I felt thrown back 20 years, but it seemed so genuinely meant that I began to talk, and as Lore was a superb listener, I was soon rehearsing the star moments of second wave feminism. She listened to me for a good 10 minutes and then, staring at me, said in a voice filled with something like wonderment, "You have a passion for equality." I was so astonished. I said, "Don't you?" "No," she said. I have a passion for many things, for love and friendship, for good conversation, for living inside another's imagination, but not for equality. There are many things I cannot live without. Before, I cannot live without equality. She peered at me again with that look of wonder in her face. "But not you," she said. "You, I believe, cannot live without it." We sat there staring at one another, and then I burst out laughing. "Look at us," I said. "Me hot under the collar over women's rights, and you reminding me of the humanist values I'm in danger of losing on my way to the revolution. Yes, Lore cried, beaming at me. You are saying what I am thinking. Isn't it interesting? We both found it precious that the temperamental divide between us proved stimulating rather than off-putting. So stimulating that we spent the next 20 years mining it. Lore was famous for describing almost everything that entered her mind as interesting. And I am equally famous for asking, what's the point? A dog squats in the street, a friendship begins to fail, a neighbor presses the wrong button in the elevator, a quarrel threatens between someone planting a flower and someone picking a flower. And Lore would say, isn't that interesting? If she said it to me, I would ask, what exactly is interesting about that? She would then explode. I can't explain, it just is, and I would not let it go. I mean, I'd repeat, what's the point? Now she really exploded. The point, with you it's always, what's the point? There is no point, it's just the way it feels. That's what interests me, the way things feel. Another of Lore's tendencies was beginning a sentence with, why do you think why do you think it is that, and then fill in the blank. Why do you think it is that people hate being corrected? Why do people feel ignored when a speaker at the table doesn't look at them, or humiliated when someone they've met doesn't remember meeting them? Often her stories are grounded in these or similar whys. It was not too long ago that Lore, for the first time in all the years, explained, quote, anything that happens, small or large, even falling down in the street in front of your house, is interesting. When I say something is interesting, it means this is something I can write about. There was in that revelation, in its structure and the tone of its voice, the sound of the Lore of other people's houses, having transformed itself into the wryly knowing narrator of her later work, most especially in the work called flash fiction. Recently, Melville House collected a series of Lore's flash fictions into a volume called Ladies' Lunch. The title refers to a gathering of 6 very intelligent Upper West Side women, Lore and 5 of her good friends, I was not one of them, who've been meeting every other month for some 30-odd years. For Lore, the Ladies' Lunch was a source of writer's gold. It provided her with a setting and a group of models that allowed her to riff on friendship, aging, party dynamics, even useless philosophizing. In one story, a character named Bridget marvels over the contemporary question of finding oneself. She asks, is there a character in Homer, in Shakespeare, in the Bible, who thinks to ask, who am I? Another character, Farrar, gets into it with, don't you love the question, who does he think he is? Or who do you think you are? Followed by a rhetorical exclamation point. Meanwhile, a character called Hope is looking out the window at some people on a neighboring rooftop. They're having a party and they didn't invite me, she exclaims. Turns out, of course, she doesn't know them. Then there follows one slightly lunatic but delightful exchange after another. At the end of the piece, one of the women says to Bridget, you got us into asking ourselves who we are. What do you say? Bridget replies, there's no who. I think it's a silly question. In another of these pieces, one not in the book, this one published separately in the New Yorker, a character called Lucinella confides that there was a time when she needed, quote, Needed to have my pencils in a row, sharpened to perfect points, all one length. Then another character, this one called Ruth, says of her friend Dario that often when he visited, he would, quote, sit and talk and fidget and look uncomfortable until he suddenly got up and straightened the picture on the opposite wall. And Hope observes that the nice woman who comes in once a week to clean doesn't put things back where they belong, and it's driving her crazy. Then the group is made to consider, why do Hope's things need to be in the right place? Why does Dario need to straighten the picture? Why do Lucinella's pencils need to be sharpened to perfect points? Various explanations are offered. Because neatness is prized, because straight feels better than crooked, because you want to be able to find your things. Yes, but why? Our old friend Bridget continues to ask, why? Why do I want? Why do I need? Why must I have? This is Lore Segal. On a Saturday or a Sunday evening around 6 o'clock, I would walk into her apartment and she'd be sitting in her favorite, she'd be sitting in her favorite rocking chair, waiting for me with a glass of wine in her hand. I am so sorry. And a pile of books and a phone on a movable stand beside the chair. She'd look up, and for a fraction of a moment, I'd see in her eyes the practiced remove of the Lore of other people's houses. But then all the years between would collapse, and the Lore of ladies' lunch crowd in. She takes a swallow of her wine, and she says to me, I find it so interesting that people always need to be agreed with. Or put another way, why do people hate to be disagreed with? Yes, I know what you're going to say, but why do you think it is so? She was more than 90. Her body was frail, her vision failing, exhaustion ever waiting to trip her up. But her genuinely deep amazement over how curious human beings are never deserted her. Not from the moment she observed herself 10 years old, thinking, wow, I'm going to England, as she has told many, many times. Those evenings that I spent talking with her were among the very best I ever hoped to have.
And now I'd like to invite up my daughter, who is named Kathleen for my mother and Lena for Lore, to come up and speak.
I'm realizing maybe we should have done some cross-speech comparisons, but it's okay. Might be a little similar. Having Lore as a grandmother was a gift that is difficult to summarize in words. In many ways, she shaped how I navigate the world. The most profound lesson I learned from her was her favorite saying, "That's interesting." My understanding of such a worldview began as we sifted through leaflets of her favorite art. Her lesson trained my eye. It taught me how to see colors differently and examine the intricacies of lines. Lore's love for the visual world sparked my love for art and my desire to create. Her lesson taught me that it is so much easier to find lightness in life when you seek out the stories in your world. She showed me how to find the humor in everything. For example, when she was in hospice, we discussed how odd it is that my best friend won't let me meet her boyfriend. And isn't it even more odd that Lore's best friend in college refused to let her meet her boyfriend? How funny that 70 years apart, young women are faced with the same confusions. Losing Lore felt like losing a part of myself. When someone teaches you, in many ways, how to think, it is astonishing to have them no longer there to talk to you. Often, it startles me to live in the knowledge that she isn't here. It fills me with a type of sadness that is almost shocking. a feeling I did not know I was capable of having. Yet, there's another feeling when I think about Lore. It's excitement. It's excitement at the possibility of having, hopefully, another 70 or so years to find the humor and interest in the world. So many years to live like Lore, someone who could fill a room with 200 incredible artists, writers, and thinkers who deeply admired her. So much time to travel, to create, to make mistakes. Time to fill a beautiful apartment with wonderful trinkets collected from years of living in an incredible city. Time to grow within my wonderful family that loves me deeply. So much time to discover so many fascinating stories. When I think about my grandmother, I feel an aching, unresolvable grief, but I also feel a wonderful sense of gratitude. I feel so immensely grateful to have had such a woman teach me what it is like to live a creative, loving, and very, very interesting life.
Now I'll invite Lore's son, my partner, Lena's father, and Isaiah's father, Jacob, to come up and have the last word.
Like my sister, I'd like to thank the Leo Baeck Institute for hosting it. I'd like to thank my sister for being the prime organizer from our side of it, and Jean, my partner, for hosting or facilitating and for constructing that photo montage that you saw when you entered. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I have to start with two confessions. The first confession is I didn't read all my mother's books. The second confession is that I didn't read all the obituaries or literary studies after her death. My justification for the first confession is that I'm not the only child of an author who didn't read all the right parents' books. But that's not a very good justification. I have a better one for the second confession about the obituaries, and that is I didn't always find my mother in them, of them I read. I did read the New York Times obituary, but I didn't see in it when she hugged me shortly after my father's death, when I asked her not to die. I skimmed the LA Times obituary, so maybe it didn't mention how she and I watched the famous Bjorn Borg, John McEnroe Wimbledon finals in the 1980s, and how she laughed uproariously when we watched Monty Python's Life of Brian because it reminded her of her London schooling. I don't know whether or not any of the obituaries mentioned how she played bowls with me and ping pong despite her lack of sporting ability because of the lack of men in my upbringing. Did the lengthy article, Literary Study in the Nation magazine, discuss how she was my best editor and how I learned more about writing from her than anybody else? I couldn't read the foreign language ones. Maybe they spoke about our lunches and our dinner, her support for me and her confidence in me, which helped me develop my own confidence and my own self-assurance. Tony Kalem, who's here, said my mother was always who only knew my mother as aged, said she always seemed the youngest person in the room. This is something my nephew mentioned about my mother did seem always young. Her enthusiasms, her intensity, how, as people said, she always found things interesting. Don't people become more jaded as they got older? Andy Warhol once said that experience only has atmosphere in retrospect, but if Warhol had met my mother, and maybe he did, since she seemed to have known everybody in the literary world, he might have changed his mind. Since my mother brought atmosphere with her, that means she always brought with her a sense of importance, partly due to her historic standing as a Holocaust survivor and Kinder of the Kindertransport, but also her constant intelligence and her love of the moment. Before I end, I want to make mention of two people. Like my cousin Peter, my grandmother and my mother's mother, Franzi Grossman, a person of deep intelligence and humor, at times to a fault, and also her brother, my great uncle Paul Stern, my mother's childhood friend, childhood hero, also a person of great intelligence and equal dignity. Since I'm an academic, you will forgive me if I finish with a quotation. Kafka wrote in his diaries, Moses failed to enter Canaan not because his life is too short, but because he is a human life. I think my mother, in her constant wisdom, recognized this sentiment when she accepted her imminent death when diagnosed with congestive heart failure. She was living a human life, a life, long or short, that is always abbreviated, cut short, incomplete. This is something that those who saw her, those who were with her at the end, and those who took care of her the most, myself and my sister Beatrice, my partner Jean, and my son Isaiah, forgot. We wanted to coax from her failing body and ultimately her failing mind another month, a week, and a day, even when my mother was in her final coma and only breathing. I wanted her to keep living. We forgot that my mother was living a human life. I keep forgetting. Thank you.
So thus ends our celebration. I wanted to recommend Lore's book, The Story of Old Mrs. Brubeck. If you're interested in Lore's reading a little more about her thoughts about what it means to die, Lore's Mrs. Brubeck looked for trouble and looked for trouble and looked for trouble, and then she died, and that's when she had no more trouble. I said to Lore, where will you be when you die? And she said, nowhere. And I said, I can't bear that. And she said, it comforts me. Thank you all so very much for coming today. Yeah.